Live lifelong fulfillment, vision in action. You left lifelong fulfillment, vision in action. Live.
And good morning. Welcome to another edition of Vision in Action Live. I'm Jim Boswell. I'm your host and the coach for Lifelong Fulfillment Initiative for your personal development. I'm the author of Lifelong Fulfillment, Take Charge of Your Life, its companion website, and this podcast. On the Vision in Action Live podcast, we focus on expert knowledge and solutions that facilitate individual personal development. These are the competencies that allow you to construct and pursue the complete vision of your best authentic life. So we bring experts to you, like today, in every conceivable discipline to help inform your thinking about your own journey to lifelong fulfillment. Welcome. Today, we're fortunate to have with us Raylene Weaver. Raylene is a marriage and family therapist, and she has a focus attention on raising emotionally healthy boys. She has experience as a K through 12 teaching credential, has worked with special ed students and with teen boys in the Santa Clara County Juvenile Probation Department. Raylene's a TEDx speaker, and she's also the author of Let Boys Be Kids First. Welcome, Ms. Weaver. It's great to have you on Vision in Action Live today.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's great to be here.
It's great. Well, we're going to be talking about the general subject matter of raising boys and supporting men. And Raylene has a lot of important experience there. So, Raylene, maybe you could tell us a little background about how you got into this and when you recognized this as an opportunity.
I think it's been just part of my life ever since I was little. I grew up in a neighborhood of mostly all boys, and I was very lucky in that I was accepted into the boys' tree fort. We played baseball together, went trick-or-treating together, slid down grassy hills on cardboard. And I always felt just accepted and included in that group. So I think that started my friendships or affinity, with boys and their sense of energy and fearlessness. And then when I was around 8 years old, my mom died of breast cancer, and my dad's drinking got worse. And I wrote him a letter saying that I was concerned about him, and we never talked about it. And I think it was that inability to comfort and connect with my dad that later in life led to me becoming a therapist so that I could provide a safe space for boys and men to talk about grief and loss and addiction issues, depression, and that kind of thing in a safe space. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Well, that's very interesting. Very interesting. So maybe you can help us understand your perspective on the difference between socializing boys and socializing girls, so we kind of understand, I guess it's naive to just say we all assume they're different, because I guess we do, but you probably have more particulars to share with us.
Well, I think with boys, they feel a tremendous pressure to be a man or act like a real man. And we don't really have a good working definition of what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And according to Plan International USA, a study they did, it showed that 30% of the boys said, I feel like society expects me to suck it up and be a man when I feel sad or scared. 40% of the boys said, when I'm angry, I feel like society expects me to be combative. And 50% of the boys said, I want to learn more about the right to feel any way I want. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone should feel safe enough to have all their feelings, because feelings are human and normal.
Right. Right. And I guess the mantra for most men of my generation was exactly that: suck it up, tough it out, and little room for expression, I'm afraid. So,
right.
So, how does this manifest itself these days with young boys? What does it look like? How do they wind up coming to you or getting exposed to your wisdom so that they can have a healthy attitude about their own emotions?
Well, I think with teenagers, impulsivity is always an issue. And I think with the boys that I worked with, it was kind of immaturity on their part, and not really being able to communicate effectively or to self-soothe and self-regulate. So if you're acting on impulse, you may be more likely to get into trouble because you're acting before you're thinking about it. And at that age, dating is difficult. Boys are going through all of these changes. And here again, there's no real script on, how to be appropriate in in certain situations. So that's how they came to me.
Okay. Now, in your experience, do you find that, a boy's parents, teachers, coaches, etc., really understand what's going on, or is that still fairly limited to professionals like yourself?
I think some do, but I really think that we need to teach boys emotional management skills,
Hmm.
empathy, imagining yourself in the other person's shoes, self esteem, whether he bakes cakes or plays football. The more support we give him, the better he'll be able to handle competition and criticism, and help him communicate, not isolate, and find his safe spaces, whether that's with friends, parents, best friends, parents, coaches, or counselors.
Right, right. So that also sounds like a theme that should run all the way through a boy's life to his mature years. Uh, I I had the opportunity to participate in what you would call a men's group led by a therapist also. And it was interesting to me how crippled many of us were in terms of our thinking about what was appropriate, our relationships with loved ones, whether they be children, grandchildren, spouses, or, and in many cases, men would have more than one spouse because, death in the family or things just didn't work out. Um, it was kind of sad to be, direct about it. And but most of those people, and I think we were a minority at that point in a men's group, were really trying to make some progress, like you said. And the therapist was saying the same sorts of things you were saying, but of course we were trying to overcome probably on the order of 50 to 60 years of pre-programmed old style management of boys and men.
Right.
So,
Right. That's part of what I talk about in my book, Let Boys Be Kids First, is that we need a new boy code. We need a new mindset so we can move from the old boy code to the new boy code. So instead of boys will be boys, boys don't cry, act like a man, we have boys will be respectful and responsible for their actions. Boys
mhm.
cry, and that's okay. Act like a human, be kind, and be yourself.
Right, right.
So it's like you said, that old mindset. And I think we need to really shift to a new mindset, a new boy code.
Right. Do you find that in the public domain that's pretty receptive with parents? I mean, are they aware of this, do you think?
Um, I think that with some families, parenting styles are kind of passed down from one generation to another. So I
Hmm.
think almost unconsciously, some parents, if they see a little boy start to cry, they might shoot him a dirty look, or they find themselves hugging their girls or being more affectionate with girls than with boys. And again, I think it's that old thinking that we don't want our boys to be seen as weak or sissies or mama's boys or that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
we need to be tough. And I really challenge that. And my thinking is that little boys have the same emotional capacity as little girls, and it's a strength, not a weakness. And I think if parents can begin to look at that and understand that boys who are loved and nurtured do better in life, personally, professionally, and in their health. And the more self-confident a boy feels, the less likely he's going to be bullied, or if he is, he's going to be able to, handle it better because he knows who he is. He's not looking for that definition of masculinity outside of himself. He's okay if he likes to wear pink and play the piano and is not a great athlete or whatever. If that's what he loves, that's what he's good at, and he's getting supported by his family, then
Mhm.
he gets to create his own brand of masculinity. And we get out of this trying to put boys in a man box. So I think some parents, they just unconsciously, they just don't really think about what they're doing. So yeah, and the boys that I worked with and working with their parents, um, I did see some changes,
Mhm.
I did.
Right.
There was more connection, I think, and more communication. And some parents realized that one of the parents that I worked with, in talking with her, she said, I think I've just had a hard time talking to my son about sex. And I kind of figured out that part of the reason is because when I was little, I was abused by one of my bus drivers. And I told my mom, and she didn't believe me. And so when this mom was talking to me, she said, "You're the only other person I've ever told this to." And I thanked her and I said, "I'm so glad that you said that. I'm so sorry you went through that. But, this is something that you went through. It wasn't your fault. And let's move forward." And I really think that caused a closer connection with her son. I could see it
Mhm.
when they left that day. So
Right.
yeah, parents, they have their own issues, that they come in with. So
Right. Right. Um, let's see. So we're trying to let boys and men actually be more emotive, if you will, in this and more genuine about their own feelings and expressive. And so, that kind of runs pretty much counter to a lot of the stereotypic behavior and popular culture. And I mean, if you look at things like movies, we're really not talking that often about this type of, um, you know, allowance for individuality. We're still talking about the old style stuff from, the 1950s. And it seems like this is a tough environment to deliver the message and the behaviors you're trying to encourage because it seems like the dominant of the culture is still stuck in the old ways of doing things and not quite so well exposed to this, nor necessarily practicing this. Do you find that, or do you find a real receptiveness in the institutions, obviously, you've worked with? How does that work for you?
well, I think you're right. I think boys get a lot of mixed messages. So you do have people like me and counselors, and the work that I've done has been built on work that's been done like 20 years ago. And
Hmm.
it's interesting to hear you talk about men's groups. So there has been that progression all along, but yet we have to keep at it. And one piece of feedback, like you said, is that when I talk to people and I talk about a new boy code, they go, "I think that's new. I've never heard that before." And
Yeah.
so that makes me feel really good because it's like, okay, you can have, we tend to rate boys on performance. And so are they good in academics or athletics? That's
Mhm.
great. We want that. We want to encourage that. But what about lifting boys up based on character? Are they honest? Are they kind? Are they courageous? And I think when I start talking about that, people begin to go, yeah, I think there's something to what she's saying. It's not just academics and athletics and boys doing things. It's great. We want to be active and we want to do things. But what about being, a complete human being? So I'm finding that there is some receptivity to that.
Right, right. So, well, it would seem that if people are getting your type of information early enough so that it impacts a boy's life, his life well could be quite different than, those like myself down the line. And so it opens up a whole new dimension for what they would call the good life, if you will. Because they're more emotionally engaged in their real feelings. So,
Right, exactly. And I think the more that we can do to increase emotional intelligence in boys and men, the more that we will decrease depression and aggression. And I
mhm,
think that has a positive ripple effect on individuals, couples, families, and society. And I'm finding too that in the new economy, a lot of employers are looking for high emotional intelligence. So the more that we can get leaders, be it male or female, to be able to understand their own emotions and be more empathetic to their employees, I think it just creates a much more cooperative and communicative and positive work situation.
mhm. So potentially they would do better at that than with the old skill sets.
Right, right.
Well, I've noticed too, there's a theme in the workplace that is emphasizing your ability to work inside a team,
Mhm.
as opposed to the old standard of, well, it takes a really strong leader, or you need to be really strong yourself, maybe entrepreneurial on your own, that this team thing really does leverage this more full expression of the male psyche, if you will, well informed about our own emotions. Um, in the past, though, that kind of was, neglected and maybe even discouraged. If like me, you came up through some service in the US military of one kind or another, they're still talking the old program to a great extent. And so some of our institutions, as I was trying to elaborate earlier, are kind of dragging their feet moving in this new direction. Um, do you encounter that? Do you see that yourself?
Yeah, well, again, mixed messages, mixed styles.
Right.
I think you're right. It does depend on the corporate environment. It depends on the leadership. But here again, I think with what I've read about the pink economy is more, even though skills like cooperation and diligence and patience, communication, maybe those are seen more as feminine. I think a lot of business leaders today see those as positives and they want that in men and women. So I think for the future, I think it's important that men are emotionally intelligent. I think it helps them and it helps everyone around them. And it
Right.
does give me some, we were talking about kind of Hollywood or whatever, video games, that's always a challenge. But when you have, um, like I talk about in my book, superheroes like Spider-Man, with
Mhm.
great power comes great responsibility. So that's coming from
Right.
Spider-Man. And then Ted
Right.
Lasso, Ted Lasso is don't be critical, be curious. And are you familiar with Ted Lasso with the TV program?
A little bit, yes. Yeah.
So wildly popular. And I was so glad to see that that program is so popular because he is genuinely a good guy. And instead of good guys finishing last with Ted Lasso, like I said, the show's been wildly popular. It's coming back for season 4. So that gives me hope when I see things like that, because like you were saying, is it life imitating art or art imitating life? It's like, let's get the message out there, and yeah.
Right. So, what's your message through the TEDx thing? If you could encapsulate that for us. Is it the same as we're discussing here, or is there specifics that you challenge people to engage and change their behaviors?
Yeah, I think it gets back to little boys have the same emotional capacity as little girls, and it's a strength, not a weakness. So I
Mhm.
think that's one of the key points there. And then, like I said, the new boy code is challenging people to look at their own fears. Why are they afraid to hug their boy, or like you were saying, the old style, the John Wayne style. I guess what I would ask of parents is that, do you want your son to be strong and emotionally closed off, or do you want him to be strong and emotionally available? And in the
Mhm.
TED Talk, I say toughness and tenderness can coexist in the same person. So I think that's part of what I'm trying to get across. You can be strong, you can be tough, you can be a good provider and a good protector, but
Right.
you can also be compassionate, and you can be sensitive and not afraid to ask for help if you need it. I think that's something that we sorely need in our society, is more services for boys and men. We've got a lot of great programs for girls and women, and we need
Mhm.
those. But boys and men also suffer from depression and anxiety and addiction issues and stress. So I really
Right.
think that we need that more. And I think that for boys and men that participate in that, it takes a lot of strength to do that. It takes courage to sit down with a therapist. You were in a group of men. Like you said, that's not easy. And men often kind of size each other up, and there's some degree of competition or whatever there. And I think that the more men can support one another, I think that's fantastic. You're in a group that can be one of the safe spaces where they can let their armor down and just be honest and just talk about things.
Right. Well, I found that men in general are more difficult on men than women are. Um, in the therapy group, it was fairly obvious. Some of the guys really come from the point of we're competitors against each other in life, in career, in every, you know, dimension, and that it was difficult for them to set that aside and say, okay, well, this is a safe space. There's nothing really to be gained by being oppositional as opposed to collaborative.
Right.
And some of them were very successful at doing that, but some really were truly stuck in saying, well, I really can't let down my guard. Uh, or they were so specifically focused on one issue that that didn't occur to them. It wasn't something they dealt with readily. So having open communication about men and men's emotional content and a balance between, like you said, tough, resilient, but still fully engaged. Uh, it's a difficult to find that audience um, from from my perspective, if you will. Uh, so getting your word out seems to be a really important thing to do. Now, in that space in total, if I'm looking for solutions besides yourself and your book and your talks, what are the other resources that people have to kind of engage their thinking and change their attitudes about how this should go, a better, this better way?
Well, I do have a Facebook group and a website called Silicon Valley Men's Center.
Ah,
And
okay.
that's partly why I created that, was to have a hub of services for boys and men. So on the website, there's information on divorce and addiction and
Mhm.
depression. And I have a list of therapists there. Now, of course, this is regional, so it's just in my regional
Sure.
area. I wish that we had more of those, or maybe somehow connect them across the U.S. But um, and then there's articles that I post daily on Facebook along the lines of what we've been talking about: emotional intelligence, authenticity, positive parenting, that kind of thing. So um, that's one resource. Yeah, Jim, I wish we had like a presidential commission on boys and men. I'd love to see that. So
Great.
that there were more resources, and to have a TED Talk at a men's conference instead of a
Mhm.
women's conference. They actually did have some speakers talking about men's issues, but it was at a women's conference. And I'm like, we need the men. We need the men's conference. So that's something I keep working on. I guess you could locally, if you go to Psychology Today, um,
Right.
that they provide a list of therapists and it tells the issues that they address. So some of them might say men's issues. So that's one way to kind of look through directories. Mm, yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, there's another gent I had heard about just actually this week, and I don't have the particulars, but about 10 years ago, he decided that this kind of a talk with a men's group would be great, and he's proliferated it pretty much throughout the US. I wish I had that name to offer our audience here, but I think if they do their little search online, they would be able to find it. So that guy has found that the anonymity, if you will, of being in a men's group via, say, Zoom, you don't necessarily have to reveal anything more than what you want to. But if you do, you can be a pretty active participant. And that satisfies more for those audiences to get started, shall we say. And they talk about all kinds of things, including this, of course. So they spanned a lot more in terms of the life of a man than just this particular issue. So that might be another resource that's available.
Right. And there might be like college campuses also. Some, I know it's hard to kind of distinguish where, but some colleges I think offer men's groups, and that would be great for young men. So
Right.
yeah.
So in your practice, how do people come to you? Do they have to be in stress between parent and child, or do you find them in, say, the juvenile probation department, first time you get to meet them? Uh, how do people wind up getting motivated to do something about this?
Yeah, I think actually I'm retired now, so
Mhm.
all of my time is pretty much dedicated to um, promoting what we've been talking about: let boys be kids first. But yeah, for me, working with the teens, that did come through the county. We did have a
Mhm.
contract with the county, and so that was great. The referrals came from them and could work with the families as well. And then I had started just a kind of an E3 network for therapists, so that they could communicate with one another. It's like, okay, I'm working with a family and, their teen son is having issues at school, who can work with this person. So it was just kind of a way that therapists could connect with one another to provide services. So that's still going. Um, yeah, and then just colleagues, people kind of learn what your specialty is, or what you're
Right.
working. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So in your, in your thoughts, what would be the very best outcome here? I know you've been working at it. You're at the retirement point, as am I. And what would the world look like if this were fully implemented in your mind?
Um, I think that there would be much more emphasis on like collaboration, communication. Like we were saying, it's not the win-lose, but how can we have
Right.
more of a win-win type of situation? I think the more that we can do to include social emotional elements into education from preschool all the way through college, it's like certain programs, Project Cornerstone for little guys. How can I fill your bucket?
Right.
A little classmate is hurt. How can I help you? How can I fill your bucket? It kind of sounds like Fred Rogers, but we just got to keep those programs, Jim. You got to keep at it. Things like that. And then when boys get older, if you're watching a movie together, it's like, how do you think that person felt? When they were getting yelled at or whatever. Again, talking about it within families, developing those feelings. And I think for boys, anger is especially challenging. And I think to parents, I would say try to get to those feelings underneath anger, because usually there's sadness or there's some kind of depression or something underneath there. So find out what's going on. And, I'd love to have programs. I'd love to have my book in, you know, libraries across the US. They're in some, and in every therapist's office. And
Right.
yeah, so just
Yeah.
just more awareness. I mean, this is great. You and I are talking. So uh, you know, just more of that.
Yeah. And it seems like we could pump up the education side of this equation as well, so that yes, we are managing their psychological health, more than we actually do these days. So anyway, this has been great, Raylene. I really appreciate all your efforts, and I think it is an important thing. I'd like to, without a doubt, recommend that people become cognizant of this, as a lifelong fulfillment kind of thing, particularly on the male side, but it impacts our female counterparts as well. And thank you so much for doing this and joining us today.
Well, thank you. It's really been great. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for the work that you do.
One thing before we leave, if people need to reach you, where should they go? Website, email, whatever you'd like to leave.
Yeah, they can go to my website, letboysbekidsfirst.com, and there they can find out where to order my book. If they'd like to get the book, they can watch my TED Talk. My social media handles are there for Facebook and LinkedIn.
Okay.
A couple of book reviews. So yeah, the website is a good place to go.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Very impressive set of ideas that need to be aired.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thanks again for attending Vision in Action Live, and I hope you got some insights you can use. Thanks be to Ms. Raylene Weaver. Our future episodes will look at things like emotional quotient and mindfulness in schools. We're going to look at the economic war on workers and the future of work, learning, and development. Our podcasts focus on interviews with subject matter experts and people leading self-directed lives so that you can see exactly what one can accomplish doing personal development. Check out newsletters, podcasts, and extensive reference materials at lifelongfulfillment.com. And you can find us routinely on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and your favorite podcast channel. There's plenty there for you to look at. And we also distribute through KFRED Internet Radio to other sources of podcasts and radiocasts. I'm Jim Boswell, your host today. And until next time, how are the men in your life doing? Thank you. Have a great week.
Lifelong fulfillment, vision, and action.